Welcome back to another mini class. Today we're going to talk about 3 ways to knit a raglan sweater. Knitting a raglan sweater is fairly straightforward, and you can actually knitting anything, any item can be knit in a multiple of ways. These are 3 of the most common ways to knit raglan type sweaters. And raglan sweaters are where you have the top of the shoulder comes down to the bottom of the arm in a diagonal, as opposed to set-in sleeves where you would have the top of the shoulder starting at the top of the armhole and coming down in a straight line. So the first way, one of the most common ways to knit a raglan sweater is to knit each piece separately and then seam the sweater together. And when you're knitting a sweater in pieces, you have to be really careful and take special care that your stitch gauge and your row gauge is consistent in all of the pieces. This is especially important because your raglan line on your sleeve here in this little section needs to, the row gauge needs to be as close to this section over here, and that will enable you to be able to get a smoother seam when you sew these pieces together. It just takes a little bit more care. It's not something that's super difficult. It's just that you have to plan for it a little bit ahead of time. The next way to knit a raglan sweater is from the top down in one piece. This method's been around for quite a long while, 50, 60 years, maybe even longer than that, but it's only become popular in the early 2000s because before that, most print publications or patterns that were put out by yarn manufacturers were designed for things to be knit in pieces, and the main reason for that was because sweaters directions were just easier to be written for piece knitting. It allowed them to put a lot of information into fewer pages. But knitting this way from the top down in one piece is very straightforward. It's almost magical in the way that the sweater actually kind of knits itself. And what you do is you cast on all your stitches at the neck, and you put in 4 markers, one for each increase point. And sometimes you also put markers at the beginning if you're going to have some additional shaping at the neck here, or to build the front of the sweater. But those markers you will remove. The raglan markers, where you're increasing for the raglan line, stay until you finish the yoke. So after you've cast on, you are actually working back and forth for the yoke section if you're going to be making a cardigan, or you can join to work and if you're making a pullover. And you continue on until you reach the depth of the yoke. You put the sleeve stitches on holders, continue to work the body down to the length that you want, bind off, and then come back and pick up the sleeves and work the sleeves down to the cuff. Or you can work the sleeves first and then work the body. Either way is fine, but I think it's more common to work the body and then work the sleeves. In my classes, I generally teach to work the sleeves first flat, but that's less common. And the other benefit of knitting from the top down is that you can try the sweater on as you're knitting it to make adjustments for fit, which is really rather convenient. That way you're sure that the sweater will fit exactly the way you want it to fit by the time that you're done. And then the last thing about knitting raglans from the neck down in one piece is that if you're knitting a baby sweater, or even a small toddler sweater, you can actually knit it on straight needles, but for anything bigger than that, child size, preteen, adult, you're going to have to work with circular needles. And the final way to knit a raglan sweater is to work from the bottom up, and in this technique you actually are knitting 3 tubes, the body, 2 sleeves, and then you knit those pieces separately. So you start at the body, you work the body in one piece up to where the armholes would begin, and then you work each sleeve also separately until the length of the sleeve up until where the armhole would be, and you join these all together. The underarm stitches here you leave on a holder. You don't put those together. You just work all of these front stitches, the first half of the sleeve stitches, back half, and then all the way around the back of the sleeve, and back around to the front. And then once you've joined this way, you'll put your markers where your raglan decreases in this case, because you're going from a bigger circumference to a smaller circumference, and you just decrease at each point, 2 for the front and 2 for the back, until you reach the neck circumference that you're looking for. Also quite easy to do. You can also try the sweater on in this instance to see if the fit is right, but really what you're fitting for is the length. You really are not able to try the sweater on as far as the fit of the shoulder until you're completely done. The only sweater construction method that you can do that with is if you're knitting from the top down. This method, though, allows you to knit in color pattern very easily, much more easily than the other methods, because you're working in a tube and you're never working the wrong side. So if you don't like to purl, this is an ideal way to knit the sweater. And this type of sweater knitting is very traditional. The sweaters have been knit this way probably since the beginning of sweater knitting, because it's very practical and rather easy. And as far as sizing goes, it's always been a percentage of the chest circumference. A percentage of the chest circumference will tell you how many stitches you need for the sleeve, how many stitches to decrease for the yoke, how many stitches you need to end up at the neck. And that math is really not that mysterious, but luckily for us, it was explained very clearly by Elizabeth Zimmerman, who advocated this method and brought it back from practical demise, actually, and made it much more popular. So my opinion about knitting raglan sweaters is that knitting in the round is probably the easiest and best way. I prefer working from the top down, but I'm not adverse from working from the bottom up. I don't like knitting sweaters, most sweaters, in pieces. I mean, there are some benefits to knitting things in pieces, but it's not my favorite way of making garments. I try to make things seamless in one piece as much as possible, because the math is easier. I can get away with not being as precise before I begin knitting. I can make decisions about fitting issues or taking stuff away or adding stuff as I'm knitting, and it gives you a great deal of confidence when you can make decisions about your garment as you're knitting it. And pretty soon you find yourself making your own designs as opposed to always following somebody else's patterns. So in the descriptions, you'll see some links to some videos that talk about how to begin top-down raglan from the neck down, and you can follow along with those, and also a link to a recipe. I'm not going to say a pattern because it's really a description on how to knit a basic sweater from the neck down, and I'll put that in the description as well, and you can give that a try. Feel free to ask questions in my knitting group, class group on Facebook, or email me, or just post your questions on my Facebook page if you like, and I'll try to answer your questions as best I can. Thanks for watching.